So today I'm going to show you about the chop saw. It has a couple of different names. One is the power miter box, compound sliding miter box. At Uxbridge High, we just simply call it the chop saw because of the action that it has when it's doing its cutting. So the purpose of this machine right here is it cuts pieces of wood to a smaller length. Okay, that's its main job. If you want to cut a piece to a narrower width, you use a different machine. If you want to make a piece thinner, again, different machine. For 90% of what we do here, it's a square, straight cut, simply taking length off of our pieces of wood. It will also cut angles. We'll go over that in another video at another time. If you're doing anything with angles, we'll do that on a case-by-case basis. But for now, let's just talk real briefly about some of its parts and some of its operation. This machine has a pressure-sensitive switch with two little thumb safety catches, so I can't turn the machine on until I've used one of my thumbs, either my left hand or my right hand, to pull this little safety catch back. Now the machine will start. It's also a pressure sensitive switch so that if I let go of it and walk away, the machine cannot keep running. Okay, so you have to have at least one hand on here activating the switch in order for this machine to operate. Okay, it's not like the bandsaw or any of the other machines that have a push button switch. Okay, so it is a lot safer in that aspect. We have right now the machine is in its lockdown and safe position. This is how we want you to leave it when we're done, and I'll show you right now how to unlock it and then relock it when you're finished. And people that don't know anything about what goes on in here, construction, manufacturing, they can look at this and say, that looks pretty safe. If I were to push down on the head of the saw here and pull this little red pin out, okay, right here, now the machine, it's on a spring, so it will retract itself. Somebody that doesn't know anything about construction can walk in and say, that looks dangerous. Okay, we want to convey an image of safety when we're in here. So when we're done, when you're done with your cut, lower the saw back down. Don't pull the trigger, just lower the saw back down and press this little red button in. Okay, that's a positive lock system that keeps the saw in the lower position. Right? We leave it like this when we're not in the room. That way, a random person or whomever can't come in and just cut something on it. They have to at least know enough to remove that. Okay, move that pin out of the way. If they've had at least this much training, they should be okay. This machine is based on a 10-inch circular saw blade. If I retract the guard with my finger, you can see we have a solid 10-inch circular saw blade. It's the same exact blade that our table saws use. It's the same exact blade that our other chop saw uses. Very rigid. It will do a very nice straight cut. It will remove a small amount of material. The blade does not wobble like the bandsaw blade does. So there's our saw blade. You'll notice it's under this guard. The guard is on a spring. So as I use the machine, it retracts the guard automatically. And then when I raise the saw back up, the guard comes back down. It's important to note, this guard will not keep your fingers or anything else away from that saw blade. Its only job is to make sure that you know there's something underneath here that you don't want to mess with, especially while the machine's running. If we do need to change the saw blade, there's a procedure for that. We start by unplugging the machine. There's some things we need to remove or loosen. We have to remove the arbor nut. Again, case-by-case basis. Instructors try to do that so that the students don't have to spend their time with that kind of thing. There is a laser and a light on the top. The light is nice because you can see a little bit better. The laser at one point was accurate. I'm not entirely certain it's still accurate. I would use a different method. I wouldn't necessarily trust the laser. It is a nice extra feature that we do have here. Our next part we're going to talk about is the sliding mechanism. Okay? This saw has the capability to cut a pretty wide piece of lumber. When you're doing your cuts, this is more procedural than parts. When you're doing your cuts, you always want to pull this saw out first, cut, and then press back. And that's a function of the direction that the blade is rotating. The blade is going to rotate in that direction. okay, towards you almost. If you make a cut go in the other direction, what can happen is the saw can run at you or pull itself into the cut. So you definitely want to make sure that you're cutting in a pushing direction with this. You have a lot more control that way. The saw blade will cut better that way. It's less dangerous. As you're pulling on this, if you're cutting that direction, the saw blade can run at you and pull at you. Most of the times when an incident occurs on this machine, that's why. The other common one is the material that you're cutting is not flat against the table or the fence, which is our next part here. We have the machine comes with this table and fence system. We've actually removed part of the fence system and built our own to accommodate larger pieces of material. The table is a fairly flat surface. Your workpiece needs to be held flat down onto the table and tightly up against the fence when you're doing your cutting. This fence is set for 90 degrees, and right now the table is set for 90 degrees. That's another way we say that. It's something that is square. On the front of the table here, you'll see a bunch of indents. Those are for changing the angle. Common angles have a detent, which the saw will automatically stop at 22.5, 30, 45, and so on and so forth. Most of the time, we're using 90 degrees, or this saw lays that out as a 0. So I'm just going to make sure that my saw is locked in place. I'm going to press down on this handle, and that makes sure that nothing moves. The only thing you want to move while you're making your cut is this saw is going to chop down, and it's going to move in a away from you, sort of backwards direction. So, operation. I've got a piece that I've glued together here. As you can see, the ends of it are not even, they're not square. I need to make sure that this piece of wood has a 90-degree corner here. So the first thing I'm going to do is put this up against my fence, put it up against on my table, make sure that I've got my Z78 safety glasses on, correct? Is that Z78 safety glasses on? Now without pulling the trigger, I'm simply going to lower the saw blade down a little bit so I can see where I'm going to cut. Now is my chance to make adjustments, not while the machine is running. While the machine is stopped, I can say, oh gee, I don't need to cut that much, maybe I'll move it over a little. Or maybe I need to cut a little bit more. Okay, slide it over. To make a cut, I'm going to pull the machine all the way out because this is a wider piece. I'm going to start the machine, slowly plunge it, let the saw blade cut. Once it goes all the way down, I'm going to again slowly push against the machine and go all the way to the back. Okay, common mistakes kids make, they don't go all the way down, and they don't go all the way back. They stop their cut here. Okay, my other hand, one hand is going to be on this because it won't work if I don't do that. My other hand needs to stay around 10 to 12 inches away from that saw blade. Okay? If you have a small piece of wood, you cannot cut it on this machine. Your fingers in here holding something is not safe. That's not okay. If you have to cut a smaller piece, see your instructor. We will help you, or find a different machine, a different way of cutting it. Okay? This machine is not designed for small pieces. It's designed for large pieces. So I've got my hand off to the side. My left hand in this case is simply going to apply moderate pressure backwards and down at the same time. So I'm almost pushing diagonally into the corner. Right? I don't want to push really, really hard because then I don't have control of things. I don't want to let the piece hang out there and cut without holding on to it. That's not safe either. So a small amount of pressure. And you also notice how I'm standing. I'm not standing with my feet together. I'm not standing in front of the machine. That's no good. Spread your feet out a little bit, get into a comfortable balanced position, and I'll go ahead and start my cut. Notice I let my saw blade stop before I lifted it up. Once the blade has stopped, I can lift it up, take my scrap piece off the machine, and put it into the trash. Now I have a 90-degree corner, which I can check with my speed square here. See if this saw really is set for 90 degrees. That looks good to me. All right, so now I've got a 90-degree corner. Now I can take a tape measure and measure my appropriate length and cut. So now I've cut my end square. I'm going to take a tape measure. I'm going to measure the length specified on my plan. In this instance, my plan is off camera. The piece I want is 20 inches long. So I'm going to start from one end, measure out 20 inches, and put a small pencil mark. Close my tape measure, take my tools and everything, put them out of the way. I don't want anything to interfere with my cutting operation here. When you're learning, I like to say draw the line. When you're a little bit more advanced, just the pencil mark will do. For learning purposes, I'm going to take my speed square, line it up, make sure this is hooked onto the edge of your board. Line it up with my line. Draw a nice square line all the way across the board. Move my tool out of the way. Notice I put an X on here. Well, the reason I did that, this saw blade has a little bit of a width to it. So every time you cut something with this, you're actually turning part of this wood into sawdust. That little groove that the saw blade leaves is called a kerf, K-E-R-F. It's a really good quiz and vocabulary question. You need to keep in mind that kerf. If I want this piece to be 20 inches long, and I cut directly on the line, the middle of my saw blade on my line, my piece will be short. Remember, you can't make them longer. You got to get new pieces or adjust everything else after you've cut something too short. I want to put the majority, all of my saw blade on the X'd side of the line. Now, this is not a standard thing. Different people will use different examples. Mr. DeMeglio works construction. He puts the X on the piece he wants to save. You just have to have that communication with the people you're working with so you don't cut pieces the wrong size. I like to put it on the scrap side. That way, this goes in the trash, and I don't have marks all over my wood that I have to sand off later. Again, piece of wood is flat on the table, tight against the fence in the back. I'm going to, without turning the machine on, lower the saw blade down and look at the teeth. Try to get the teeth lined up with my line. Once I've got that and I'm fairly satisfied that I'm going to cut where I want to, I can then make my cut. Okay, again, I'm finished. Take your scrap pieces, take them off the machine. Now I have a piece that's cut to the correct length. Okay, that's all this machine does, cuts pieces to length. You cannot do this. No good. Oh, I just want to cut. No. Absolutely not. There's a different machine for that. This is very, very ridiculously unsafe to try to do this. Okay, we're only changing the length of our piece. That operation is called cross-cutting because we're cutting across the grain. It's another vocabulary word, another quiz question. Okay, we've got curve, we've got cross-cutting, we've got all the chop saw parts. We've got a whole bunch of new information for all of you. Okay, so this is now a part I can use on my project. Nice and accurate cuts with this machine. I'm done with my cutting operation. Am I finished with the machine? No. I need to do three more things. First, I'm going to lower this down and push that button in so that it's safe. I don't know if somebody's coming behind me to use it or not. I always leave it like this. The second thing I want to do is I want to clean up all my stuff. I'm going to take my tools, put them back in the toolbox. I'm going to take my project, move it off to the side, wherever else I'm working. I'm going to go get a brush, brush off all of the extraneous dust. And then the very last thing, because it's 2020, I just touched this. So I've got to go get the sanitary wipes, the alcohol wipes, and I'm going to wipe down all the surfaces that I touched over here. Okay, I don't have them with me, but that's something that we will do. Let us know if you have any questions. Thanks for watching.